Hello again. I'm sure that we have all of us heard about microaggressions, those little things which white people do which irritate or offend black people and other minorities. Typical examples include not smiling at a black person, using negative body language towards them, crossing the road to avoid passing them on the pavement, that sort of thing. My own suspicion is that these kinds of things are not racial prejudice at all, but merely ways in which black people and white have different ways of behaving and conducting themselves. For instance, Caribbeans often stand closer to people than the average white person, and they make longer eye contact. This can be perceived as aggressive by some people, although it's really not. You sometimes white people in pubs will say, "Who are you staring at?" And sometimes the way that people of Caribbean origin look, they move close to people and they stand close. There's less personal space involved. It comes across to some people as being menacing. Talking loudly also varies by ethnicity, with Africans coming at the top of the scale here, and some groups from Asia being at the bottom of this particular spectrum. Some ethnic groups seem to want or need more room, more physical room than others. These things are just a question of custom and culture, not an indication of racism at all. Since we're all very familiar with the things which white people do, which are sometimes identified as being racist microaggressions, and these can include something as trivial as raising one's eyebrows at an unusually bushy afro, I might mention, I thought it might be amusing to reverse the process and think about things which some of those who are of African and Caribbean heritage routinely do, and which are capable of being construed in a negative or racially charged way. White English people tend often to be self-effacing and to shrink into a small space in public. I've noticed this, I'm sure most people do, that white people tend to move back as a rule, white English people in particular, and try and make themselves small to let other people have room. They also seem to apologise for their very presence. If you stamp on a white person's foot in a crowded place, they're apt to say sorry to you. Seriously, you might try this as an experiment sometime. It's the English way. They say, "I'm sorry," if you shove them or stamp on their feet. Many Caribbeans find this baffling and a little contemptible. Why should they keep their voices hushed in the street or make superhuman efforts to take up less space? Why shouldn't they glare at somebody if that person treads on their foot or they feel that they're being, treated with less than the respect they think they deserve? The idea is absurd. Watch a white person crossing a road when a driver has stopped for them. The pedestrian often gives a half apologetic smile like this, as though they are doing something wrong which is inconveniencing the driver. It's a very English thing. They do this often even if they're on a zebra crossing and have the right of way. Here's a question. How many viewers have stopped their car at a zebra crossing and let a black person cross? Anybody notice the difference in body language? Often a black person will not slink in an ashamed way across the road in the same way that white people tend to do. Instead, they might just stroll across, barely acknowledging the driver who has stopped for them. This can give an impression of ill manners for white English people. And I've been in cars when this has happened and the driver has remarked on it. Much the same applies to bus queues. At one time there was a convention in Britain that everybody waited quietly and patiently for their turn to get on a bus. Now it seems as though it's a case of every man for himself. This is a result of a jumble of different ethnicities and cultures all jostling together, Chinese and African, Indian and Caribbean, black, white and every shade in between. One of the most often quoted examples of a microaggression which white people perpetrate against black people is crossing the road when they see a black person approaching. This can seemingly cause offence and upset. Let's look at the case though when two people are approaching a narrow gap where there's not room for both to pass without one of them shrinking aside and perhaps moving the body sideways. White English people make an absolute fetish of showing the person approaching that they are ready to do this. It's a matter of principle. White people make sure, oh no, I'll do it after you. No, I'll give way. I'm sure we all know about this. They see it as an act of common courtesy and they wish to show that they are aware that politeness requires such a display. Now here's the thing, have any white people watching this video ever found themselves approaching a black person of Caribbean heritage in such a circumstance? If so, then they might have observed there is less chance of the black person shrinking to one side and making an elaborate show of giving enough room for the other person. Often they simply don't see why they should be the ones to give way like this. This behaviour is not rudeness or aggression, it's just a reluctance to make oneself small and to give way to other people as a matter of routine. Many white people, though, read this conduct as arrogant or aggressive. It's not, but it can be interpreted in that way. As I say, misinterpreting body language, tone used, amount of noise generated and 100 other things can happen all the time between people belonging to the same ethnicity. Between those who belong to different ethnic groups, the scope for misunderstanding and ill feeling are magnified 1,000-fold. I strongly suspect that many people watching this video will have been irritated at times by what they have seen as discourtesy by black people whom they encounter, or by what they feel is noisy and obtrusive behaviour by black people. All such frictions cut both ways, and I think it's a mistake to single out white people as being the group always giving offence. As is so often the case, I think it's likely to be 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Blaming every misunderstanding on white people alone and then attributing it to racism strikes me as singularly unhelpful for community relations.